You are listening to the Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the Overwatch League news and information. The show with Tactical Visor on the statistics and analysis. Here are your hosts, Totally Drunk, Spider, and Slambo.
What is up, guys, and welcome back to Overwatch League Network, the podcast with data on all the latest Overwatch League news, information, and esports analysis. I am your host, Totally Drunk, and tonight on episode 53, we're going to go around the league discussing the latest Overwatch League news, take a look at some of the rumored rosters for some of these expansion teams, and of course, we got some other unofficial news in regards to Season 2 schedule changes, which we'll get into for our main discussion. But before we get into the news and introduce you to my co-hosts, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who is hanging out with us tonight for our live show on Twitch, and of course, thank all of our repeat listeners out there. As you can see, I have someone here with me tonight to help break everything down, and, I'm without my hashtag soulmate for another week, but joining me tonight is our resident Anna in our triple sniper team composition, which is going to be just causing absolute havoc in Drunken Science Revenge come Tuesday, that being Spider. Spider, how are you doing tonight, brother?
How did I get relegated to Ana? I thought I was going to be Widowmaker. I didn't know this. I didn't sign up for this. I wanted to click on heads. No, I actually really like playing on it, and I'm glad she's back because even on the Ham-Fisted Taco account, which we played with on Saturday night, I've actually been enjoying Ana more than Doomfist and Hammond and Sombra because I don't know. I like playing Ana. It's kind of, I don't know. It's kind of cathartic after being a DPS main for so long. It's kind of like, okay, you guys do the work, and then if you die, that's on you. I'll heal you, but I'm still gonna blame you. Whereas when I was the DPS, I would blame the healer. So now I just blame everybody else. So
that works.
I mean, you were. Well, when we did quick play last time, you main tanked, but we were doing mystery heroes on Saturday, so it was pretty much just luck of the draw at most points. Although I did really luck out on Saturday. They gave me a lot of Soldier 76. In those games, we did pretty well on. So, but pretty quiet week, man. I mean, we were talking about it before the show. Sometimes you got to make up your own news or go out and look for some news, and that's what we did. We actually found some pretty cool stuff to talk about tonight. So I'm ready to get into it.
Yeah, I mean, there's stuff kind of affecting the Path of Pro scene all the way up. We got a ton of rumors because, the rumor mill has kind of been in full swing throughout the offseason. And, we got some pretty big news, at least, out of the Outlaws, Academy team anyway, with GG Esports Academy. So, Contenders Trials right now is underway for both North America and South America. And you have GGEA having to drop out of Contenders Trials North America after they failed to submit a roster before the league's deadline. So as a result, for all of these other North American Trials teams, they're going to be receiving a win. And, this kind of comes after the team failed to give out contracts to potential players due to a hiring freeze from their parent organization, Infinity Esports and Entertainment. And, there's been a lot of, talk about what's going on kind of, behind the scenes, and some staff changes are definitely on the horizon for Infinity Esports that kind of led to, this temporary suspension of these subsidiary groups that are operating under their banner. And, when we talk about GG Esports Academy, this is a team that got relegated to Trials after they failed to qualify for the Contenders playoffs in this past season. And they're only one of two Academy teams that actually got dropped down to Contenders Trials, the other being British Hurricane, who are the Academy team for the London Spitfire. Now, this news also comes after some recent talks, which has been all over the competitive Overwatch Reddit as well as Twitter, that GG Esports Academy were actually targets of VOD sharing in the Tier 2 scene, and there's been a lot of discussion about that, and kind of how there's been dedicated Discord servers, so you have these Tier 2, Tier 3 teams that are working together basically to try to take down some of these more funded teams, for lack of a better way to put it. But it just seems like everything from the top down is starting to crumble just around this major investor in the Houston Outlaws. But by the looks of it, with the Outlaws camp, everything seems to be okay there, but it's affecting everything around them right now.
Yeah, I mean, with all the stuff going on in Infinite, and if you haven't really looked into that and you're interested to see some behind the scenes in the Outlaws and obviously all their other teams that operate under Optic, I would definitely encourage you to look it up because there's some crazy stuff going on behind the scenes, like major investment shakeups. Who owns majority shares, like a lot of really boring stuff that is really spicy. So I would definitely check that out. But it is definitely, like you said, it is a top-down trickle, and that's affecting it all the way down. And for a team to not even be able to field a roster is pretty bad. And I don't know if they just, gave up because they couldn't field a roster they felt was capable, or they just never had their ducks in a row to get there. That's, that's bad. And unfortunately, that makes, the Outlaws look bad. That makes the league look bad because this is an academy team. And while, there isn't too much of a spotlight on the academy teams, it still is going to be that little asterisk next there. Like, and, Dallas's academy team, or, the Valiant's academy team, or, whatever team has an academy team, they're going to be like, and the Outlaws, oh, too soon? Did we not mention that? Like, you guys couldn't even field 6 people for a team, it was pretty bad. So I'm sad to hear that the internal turmoil is causing them problems, but there's going to be some growing pains, and I feel like they're just the first ones hit with this.
Yeah, this is a team that basically had traded Smurf to the Shock in order to get Dante for the Outlaws, and there had been a lot of talks between GG Esports Academy and last night's Leftovers doing like a little bit of a roster merge. And I know there was even one of the things in this report was them talking about wanting to lock down a player in like a 5-year contract, which in esports is like unheard of. And when you kind of like look at the field between both GG Esports Academy and last night's Leftovers, really there's only one player that you can look at that you could try to see, like, this organization try to weasel into a contract because he doesn't have an agent. And this is someone that, Edinar and I have talked about a lot on Heroes Never Die because he is a 13-year-old prodigy, that being Sugar Free. So, it's one of those situations where, you feel bad for the players because it's affecting not one but 2 teams essentially here between, GG and LNL. But that's not the only news that we got out of that sort of camp, because we do know earlier today, even a couple hours before our show, that Kai has been let go from the organization. Whether it's Outlaws, Optic, Infinite, he was wanting to stay with this organization and just, be, remain a loyal member regardless of what role he was going to be serving with this core group. And, we talked about Kai's history. This is a coach that coached not only Team Envious, but also the Dallas Fuel, before he later joined the Outlaws back in May during the inaugural season. Now, as I said, like, the Outlaws outside of this, they are, still intact. So, Tyron is still there, remaining with the organization, so you don't really have to worry about that. But you have Infinite, who have just been under a lot of distress lately, and they've already made, like, a number of changes, kind of, like, as a whole. They had Optic Gaming's League of Legends general manager resigning from his position. You also had their director of international development also leaving as well. So just based on that, like, you can expect some more changes to be hidden, but, I hope that isn't going to, affect what we're seeing with the Outlaws organization right now, because when you look at the moves that the Outlaws have made, right, they picked up Dante, which was a huge deal because they didn't have that sort of specialist on their team. They have, they put themselves in a better position to succeed than where they were in Season 1. Now, that's not to say that all of the problems have been patched on this team, but they're at least making the moves that they need to do in order to reach that next level. And I just hope that we're not going to be seeing more cuts, at least on the staffing side, for the Houston Outlaws here in the near future, just knowing the other problems that they're having with this parent organization.
Yeah, I mean, speaking to the Outlaws, I really don't expect to see too many more. staff changes from them. It seems like this was kind of out of the blue, and they weren't maybe initially planning on letting Kai go, but apparently Clockwork is an amazing assistant coach because they said we got Clockwork now. See ya, Kai. So Clockwork's finally better than somebody at something. Is that too soon? That sounded really mean. It probably was, but that was my takeaway, that they like Clockwork better than Kai. And from the stuff that we've heard about Kai, we hear that he's a great person, he's a great friend, but he lacks in the coaching department, which I guess the Outlaws really looked at what happened in season 1 and they said, Tyrong's a great head coach, but he needs a strong support system behind him. And a lot of teams actually are going through that. This isn't specific to the Outlaws. The Fuel's actually also going through that, and they've kind of grown up with it as well. So I feel like they were like, Kai's just not the right assistant coach for us. We're gonna move on. And I wouldn't be surprised if we hear the exact opposite. Rather than a let go, I feel like they may pick on another assistant coach just to kind of bolster the roster. But I'd like to say I was surprised when I read this, but I just kind of chuckled to myself and said, okay, so he's gone from another team.
Yep, so he's not fit for Texas, apparently. And, speaking of, contracts, this one isn't necessarily from, team staff. This is more, broadcasting staff. So we have to take a look at observing in the Overwatch League. And it looks like, just based off of what we've seen so far, that the way that the game is going to be observed is set to change due to contracts of Overwatch League observers, Jason Baker, and Imagine not being renewed for Season 2. So Baker had served as the lead observer and observer director, and was in charge of the in-game spectating throughout the league's inaugural season, which continued all the way into the Overwatch World Cup group stages for this year. And with Imagine, he served as the main free camera observer during the inaugural season and the World Cup. And according to Baker, Imagine was the guy who basically invented how the free camera worked in Overwatch. Now, that being said, there's been no replacements being named for either of these positions. And if you've been on Twitter, if you've been looking at, some of the Blizzard employees and personnel, this news caught a lot of people by surprise. And these are, two guys that have very extensive experience working in esports production, which includes stints in ESL, E-League, MLG. And if you've been on the Reddit, a lot of the feedback was pretty negative in regards to the Overwatch League observing. And I can understand part of it. I felt like initially there were a lot of growing pains in the first season, but we did get better as the season went along. But that being said, Spider, overall, how would you rate the observing experience throughout Season 1?
This is going to be the exact opposite of my previous response. I was actually really surprised this happened. I didn't have a problem with the observing in Season 1. Now, I do know there are some issues. I'm not going to tout that it was perfect. I'm not going to say that they were amazing, because we've seen better observing from previous events such as Apex. Mm-hmm. But what they were given with the metas that they had to actually observe, they actually did pretty well. And I know a lot of people had problems with Jason because he liked to push the storylines, and sometimes that would cause you to miss other key plays and stuff like that. But he was doing what he thought created the most cinematic experience, and sometimes it worked. Obviously it didn't work enough for Blizzard standards, so they didn't renew the contract. But there were some cool stuff that we got out of that, especially in pertains to the Widowmaker duels and stuff like that. So I was surprised this happened. And you had mentioned Imagine 42's work on the free cam. Free cam and even the third person cam wouldn't work the way it does now without his input. So these two were very integral in getting observing to the point of where it is now. And I remember us sitting together last year in the World Cup saying, wow, this looks so much better. The observing is so much better. The viewing experience is so much better. And you have to know that these two people had a lot of input into that. So to me, what this says, letting two, pretty high profile behind the scenes people go and surprising the rest of the staff, is they may actually be moving to a third party observing crew. That's really the only thing I can think of. And typically what leads me to think that way is when you go outside to buy a third party or bring a third party in, most of them do not like to clash heads. So they're say, okay, remove the top two and we'll train everybody else to our methods. And to me, that's kind of what this looks like. If you know, like corporate structure and stuff like that, they're like, we don't want to butt heads. We don't want to deal with, preconceived tactics or notions or stuff like that. So if you remove the head observer and you remove his second in command, everybody else we can get to fall in line. And that is to a T what this looks like to me.
Yeah, I did find it interesting that these contracts were only good for 1 year. And, a lot of people are like, oh, well, they got fired. And that's really, really not so much the case. It was just, they just didn't renew the contracts. So, there's been a lot of, misunderstandings when it came to the contract deals that were put in place for the observers.
Technically, yes, but it could be worded differently
Right.
just as easily.
This is true. But, speaking of the inaugural season, we do have a new book that is coming out that is being published by Prima. And this is going to be taking a look back at Season 1. Now, Prima is known by gamers due to their publishings for strategy guides as well as walkthroughs. And you can actually order this, or pre-order it on Amazon, and it costs $39.99. And this is set to release on November 16th. So this book is going to be giving us, kind of like behind-the-scenes look, interviews. They'll have featured coverage of the London Spitfire, who, won the first season after many struggles. And also offer, season highlights all the way through the All-Star weekend. But really, Spider, is this going to contain the juice? The spicy drama, the scandals? Because there was a lot of stuff that went down in the inaugural season that they might want to shy away from because of publicity reasons and not wanting to have to, kind of have people relive those moments.
Yeah, so I'm going to get this out of the way. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to actually probably pre-order it tomorrow because tomorrow's payday. But I hope that this is a full look at the first season. Honestly, the only scandal I could probably get away with letting them omit that I wouldn't be upset about is the Dreamcasper stuff, because that gets into some pretty dicey territory. But the XQC stuff like that, they could put that in there and spin it to a way that it's not overtly negative, but it deserves a mention. It at least deserves a mention. There's a lot of little stuff here and there that deserves a mention. But I do hope that this does include the good and the bad. I hope this isn't just a fluff, pat yourself on the back, good job, first season was amazing, completely perfect, and it'll only get better from here kind of thing, because the first season wasn't perfect. Us as fans, we kind of have these golden tinted glasses, are okay, this is amazing, but when you take a step back critically, there's a lot of stuff that they could have did better. There was technical hiccups here and there, just stuff that they can improve on, and the drama. So I feel like this is something that they should take seriously and kind of include the whole thing. And I hope, as far as the interviews go, I hope they're not just oh, well, how was it playing under this? I hope they ask good questions, Fisher, what was it like to beat London the first time after they let you go? And how do you feel about the Gladiators now that they let you go? I hope that they're real interviews. They're not just so what do you think about the Mercy meta from stage 1? Nobody cares about that stuff anymore. We want actual interviews. So I hope it's not all sugar and rainbows, but I'm 99% sure it's going to be sugar and rainbows.
Yeah, because when you look at it, they don't want to stir the pot and bring up these bad feelings about some of the missteps that they had. But that being said, obviously it was the first season. That was a huge step for esports, and Overwatch esports as a whole. And hopefully, they can only improve from here. Whether it's spectating, team management, just improving player mentality, things like that. But I am definitely going to be picking this one up. It's a pretty big book overall. It was over 300 pages from what I saw on the Amazon page. So I'm really curious to check out what exactly this book is going to have to offer all of us. Now, that being said, maybe one of the topics that they'll talk about in this book is the training facility and the lack of windows. So we actually know that Hastro, the team owner and CEO of NV Gaming and Dallas Fuel, released some renderings of the Dallas Fuel's new training facility that they're building for the upcoming season of the Overwatch League. So, during the inaugural season, basically, these teams trained in these small rooms in Burbank Studios that didn't have any windows, and they really lacked the necessary space for the rosters, let alone also having, like, the coaching staff, and the analysts, player coaches, whatever. Like, there just wasn't a lot of, like, room to move around in for these teams. And, like, several teams right now are looking to build custom training grounds elsewhere. Now, Fuel's facility is being designed and built in partnership with TTG Gaming, and this is going to be serving as, just where they're practicing for now, but the team does plan for a home venue and training facility in Dallas, of course, once we get to the whole home and away, traveling for Season 3 of the Overwatch League. But that being said, Spider, like, do you feel like this is going to be something that's going to be in the works for a lot of these teams, just knowing that you want to have something in place at home, but you also want to maybe not spend all of your time at the studios for that matter?
Yeah, I think we'll see a lot of teams pop up with training facilities. Maybe not anything as fancy as this, because it seems like Dallas is really going for that, like the pizzazz, like the wow factor for this, like the renderings and stuff. Like, there's no reason to put that stuff out there unless you're really trying to impress somebody. And I don't know if it's investors or what, or just fans, because as a Fuel fan, the first season was a little rough. But the first thing when I looked at this render that popped out at me is they have 12 practice PCs and then like 5 or 6 coach PCs. So you're looking at internal scrims immediately based on just what we're seeing in this render. And I like the aesthetic choices. Like, I like the pictures. I like the little mini tower things in the middle that had pictures on them. And atmosphere does make a difference. If you're in a training facility most days of the week, you want it to kind of look nice and feel nice. So I am happy that Dallas is finally investing a little bit more money into the team, because you could tell in the first season, like they weren't quite as bad as Florida, but from what we understand, it took them a little while to start putting money into the team. Like, they kind of were riding that envious coattail, success, and then that they got slapped in the face like, oh, this is a completely different league. And it took them 3 stages before we saw anything remotely resembling a playoff ready team. So I'm happy to see this as a Fuel fan.
Yeah, and not only that, but they also have a kitchen there, so Tamu can be up there, working up some meatballs,
some meatballs,
and maybe we'll get more of the NV cooking series that they had on YouTube. For that matter. But anyways, let's talk a little bit about the LA Valiant, who are planning another show match during the off-season. So, we got a little bit more off-season competition. So, in the past, we talked about the California Cup, which will pit the LA Valiant up against the San Francisco Shock. And now we have a show match between the LA Valiant and UC Irvine. So this show match is going to be taking place on October 11th at the Terrace on the UCI campus, and the match will be streamed on the UCI Esports Twitch channel. So for those that don't really follow the collegiate, side of Overwatch, UC Irvine were the runner-ups in the Fiesta Bowl Overwatch Collegiate National Championship, where they lost to UC Berkeley. UC Berkeley being repeat champions, and they've been pretty dominant. But like these UC colleges, they offer full tuition in esports, which has become more and more of a thing. But when we kind of look at the path to pro scene and we look at everything that TESPA is doing, how vital do you feel like collegiate competition is in regards to the sustainability of the path to pro scene?
I think it's really important. I am honestly surprised that they haven't tapped more into that market, just because of the fact that there's a lot more players in collegiate teams that are actually age ready, all of them, because they're in college, than contenders. So there's this whole untapped market of people in school that never thought they could be, esports champions, that are really good at the game because they've gotten a scholarship at it, that could be possible, contenders for a spot. I don't understand why they didn't reach more into this market, because a lot of people, that are in that position that have already gotten a scholarship would surely give up a year of college to go play in the Overwatch League if they have the skills. I mean, that is 100% what happened to Siegel. Siegel was in college. His stream got big. He said, "Hey, mom and dad, I'm making a bunch of money doing this. I want to try to go pro." And his parents literally like, "Okay, we'll take a couple years off college and see where it goes." And look at him now. So there's like this whole untapped market. Now, I'm not saying all these people are going to be Siegel, but there is talent there that they should really be exploring. And I think this show match is a good first place to do it. And man, will it be great if they beat the Valiant, because then that's going to raise a whole bunch more questions, and the Valiant are never going to hear the end of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like the same thing when Runaway beat Team South Korea from this year's World Cup. And yes, I know it's a show match, but, this is a really good opportunity for one of these UC schools to go up against top-level competition. And regardless of if it's a show match or not, like, we've always been curious to see whether or not these collegiate teams would get opportunities to, scrim and practice against some of these tier 1 or even tier 2 teams. And this is really like our first look at this happening. So I'm definitely going to be checking this out on October 11th and seeing how UC Irvine stacks up against some steeper competition. But it should be a good time all around. I just wish that, the Fiesta Bowl would, shorten the name just a little bit, because getting through that is work in itself.
Maybe next year. Maybe they'll just call themselves the Dorito Bowl.
We can only hope. But in other Overwatch League news, we gotta go ahead and look at the Florida Mayhem camp. And they've made some moves in regards to their staffing. So we have one of the most experienced executives in the Overwatch League having found a new home with the Florida Mayhem, that being none other than Bare Hands, or Scott Tester. And he had served as the director of player personnel for the New York Excelsior in, the first season. He's also currently the general manager of the USA Overwatch World Cup team, the soon-to-be 2018 World Champions.
USA.
Exactly. So Bare Hands had left the Excelsior a few months into the season back in April of 2018. And, when we look at Florida, there are a ton of storylines going on with Florida after, the first season. They basically dropped all of the Misfits roster that this team had built around, and this is a team that was known for kind of being short-staffed. And when you look at Bare Hands, there's been a lot of people that have basically just outright questioned what work he actually did with the New York Excelsior when it came to the role that he was in. Because a lot of people, if you ask them, they're like, well, you didn't really piece together this team because it was already, kind of a pre-made roster from Luxury Watch and their organization. And I feel like a lot of people just haven't been given, like, Bare Hands his due. So when you look at a team like Florida, like, this is a perfect project for someone like Bare Hands, because really, with Mayhem, people aren't really expecting a whole lot based off of how they fared in the first season. And since this is a restructure, what better way to prove how good you are as a player personnel than by helping build up, like, a new roster from the ground up, and then, seeing where you improve from there.
Exactly. This is the same situation Dallas was in with their coaching situation. As soon as they got rid of Kai and brought in Arrow, it was like night and day. So I feel like the same thing could happen with Bare Hands, because while people question what he did with New York, because a majority of the team came from Luxury Watch, he still had to scout talent. He still had to bring the team together. And not everybody came from Luxury Watch, so he still had to pick other people up. And we saw the success New York had. They ultimately didn't get to that championship, but they were the most winningest team in the regular season, and they still won 2 of the 4 playoffs. So fairly successful, I'd say. And you're absolutely right. I think the Mayhem is the perfect project for him to, kind of prove himself once again. I feel like he's actually already proved himself. If New York and the US Overwatch team I'll say with New York, and if the US Overwatch team does secure the championship. But that kind of pushes me back to what we've been talking about, and this might be a very Korean heavy roster, because Excelsior is anything to point at, he definitely likes Korean rosters. So I'm curious to see how this plays out, because I really do hope that it works out well for the Mayhem, because I think the league would be better if there are less, Mayhems and Shanghais and, for the first 3 stages, Fuels in the league.
Mm-hmm.
If teams are much closer, obviously you're still going to have, teams on the bottom, but if those teams are on the bottom are closer to the middle of the pack, all of the games are going to be much more exciting. So I hope to see, elevated play from all the teams, including Florida. And I think Bare Hands is a good guy to do that.
Absolutely. And in the position that they're in, this is a team that finished in 11th place. So there's really nowhere else to go but up if you are the Florida Mayhem. But, we'll see whether or not Tavik is filling that bus driver, kebab getter role as we expect him to in the upcoming season. But this is go ahead and lead into our main discussion for tonight. So our plan tonight is we're going to take a look at some of the rumor mill stuff in regards to the expansion team rosters, primarily when it comes to the Atlantic Division. And then we'll talk about some of the unofficial scheduling changes that we could be seeing for Season 2 of the Overwatch League. So first up, this is worth noting because this just closed. We do know that the exclusive expansion sign-in window for free agents is done. So at this point, free agency is open to all teams right now. So when we look at the windows, basically right now, teams have to submit a roster of at least 8 contracted players by December 1st. We still don't have like a final deadline in regards to player negotiations or trades. That's expected to be announced at a later date. And, we've seen some more social media handles popping up from these expansion teams, but we haven't heard anything about Brandon as of yet. But, we did see earlier today, there was a fake Twitter account for the Paris expansion team that, someone had posted in our Discord. I'm like, yeah, I can't believe this at all based on some of the tweets that they sent. And sure enough, it was a fake account. It's already been suspended. So Twitter was on top of that, but it's hard to tell whether or not we can consider this to be the start of like the F5 season. Like when we look at last year, like a lot of the stuff that we got was at BlizzCon. So I don't know if they're going to go a similar route where maybe we're only going to be hearing maybe a few players here and there, if it's going to be like a trickle effect, or if it's just going to be, opening the floodgates and boom, here's your brand, here's your roster. And then we'll go from there. Like, where exactly do you think we're going to be at right now? Because, one window closes and, we're expecting to hear something. And we've seen, like some teases from some of these expansion teams, but nothing official as of yet.
I think it's going to be all quiet until probably late November, early December, because that's kind of how it went last time. Is there was like a few high profile announcements, and I feel like we'll get those again. Like if some of the players for like Atlanta are true, I feel like those will get like high profile announcements earlier, and then we will see like the just the floodgates of information. The only exception to that would be if certain teams picked up whole other teams.
Okay.
I feel like that might happen earlier rather than later, because it just generates hype earlier, and then they can kind of continue that. So, like say off chance that Toronto signs Runaway, which might be a possibility, might not.
That's Vancouver. That's
rumored. I know. I wasn't trying to give it away. I was going with a Canada team, but I didn't want to give away because we still got to talk about stuff. I mean, we've only been here for a few minutes, so I'm trying to draw it out a little bit.
But we're talking about that next week anyway.
Yeah, but so Vancouver, say they sign Runaway. If they announce in the next 2 weeks that they signed Runaway, then they can start scheduling events before the season starts and say, oh, come meet Runaway, or come meet your Vancouver team, which I think teams really need to start doing, because first season was all about just generating hype for the league, but now teams are going to have to generate hype where they live, because next season possibly they could be living there. So I feel like the earlier they announce full teams, the better. But unless it's a full team pickup, we're not going to hear much until the signing window. And the one key thing to remember is, even though the expansion team signing window has closed, there could be a lot of players that were signed that are unannounced. Mm-hmm. So You can't say, oh, well, we haven't heard anything, so they must not have signed anything. Because I actually had one person ask me that today. They said, oh, well, did they just squander their signing window? No. I'm sure a lot of these teams have signed players, unannounced, that they will announce later.
Mm-hmm. All right, so with that being said, we're going to take a look at some of the, unofficial rosters for these expansion teams. So this week, we're only going to focus on the teams that will be competing in the Atlantic Division. So next week, we'll be taking a look at the Pacific Division teams. So first up, let's talk about one of the bigger teams, that being Paris. As I noted, there was a fake Twitter account that got, suspended pretty quickly. But when we look at the rumor mill, when we look at what the sources have been telling, people like BenchBob, like Michael, this has, a full EU roster, which I'm sure Europe is going to be ecstatic about. So looking at the rumored lineup for the tank line, we have Ben Best, RCK, LH Cloudy, and Finzi. For DPS, rumored we have Danye, Soon, Shadowburn, and Nico. And then for the support line, they have Hip and Cruz. Okay, so again, all this stuff that we're talking about for our main discussion is all unofficial, it's all rumored. And, there's some pretty big names on this roster. So I mentioned this is an EU roster. That is a pretty big deal because we don't really have, these, well, at least for Europe anyway, we don't have a national roster. So, we have players on this team that are coming from France, Finland, Poland, Russia, United Kingdom. And, they have a pair of, prior Overwatch League talent, both with Soon, coming from the LA Valiant, if the trade is true, as well as Shadowburn, who played for the Philadelphia Fusion. You already have some pre-existing synergy, because you have the Team Giganti tank duo of RCK and LH Cloudy, as well as Nico and Hip, who had both come from Eagle Gaming, who had just won Contenders Season 2 over in Europe. Now, that being said, we kind of look at their approach to building this team, and knowing that this team is fully European, do you feel like Paris would own, the majority of the EU fan base because of that? Or are they just going to continue to support their Korean overlords in the London Spitfire?
No, Paris would immediately pick up a lot of support in the EU. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of London fans just because they are the champions, and that speaks to a lot to fan bases. But being made up of an entirely EU team definitely helps. And the fact that some of these EU players are very high profile, and the other ones that aren't high profile aren't exactly low profile players. I mean, you have some seriously talented players if this ends up being true. I mean, not even talking about Soon and Shadowburn, people that have actually played in the league. When you're talking about Finzi, Cruz, Ben Best has been tearing it up for France in the World Cup. This could be a really scary roster if they get their stuff together and this ends up being true. So I feel like this is, if you live in the EU, this is going to be your team, and it absolutely should be if this ends up being true. I'm going to keep saying that because, some people would pop in and out and they'd be like, oh my God, did this really happen? When did this get announced? But this is all rumor mill stuff. So I can be excited and it not be real, and I can be disappointed.
Yeah, it goes both ways. Okay, so that being said, looking at this unofficial roster, there's a little bit of Team Rogue in here. So, do you feel like there's the possibility that maybe they'll look at targeting people from the Dallas field? Unco and AKM both come to mind as potential trade targets. And kind of above that, when we look at the DPS duo of Soon and Shadowburn, I feel like still to this day, I think people still don't give Soon as much credit as he deserves, for all of the work that he's done with the LA Valiant. And, Shadowburn, it was just an unfortunate circumstance, knowing just how quickly, EQO, shot up to the forefront. And he really showed, no sign of slowing down. So it was just a series of unfortunate events for Shadowburn, and I don't know if he just needed to keep, more puppies around him so, he could show some sort of emotion or what, but, I would not be surprised to see Paris go for more, really well-known European players, and, knowing that they have a lot of French players already on their roster, Unco and AKM would seem like a natural fit for this perceived roster.
It's possible. I won't rule anything out, but I highly doubt it. Especially if the current roster is true, they kind of have shored up most of their spots. Honestly, the big thing I'm curious about, and I think this will fall on Cruz. I don't know much about Hip's play style because I've only seen him here and there, but they need a really good shot caller if this roster is true, because the big thing for Shadowburn was the reason he got mainly replaced with EQO is EQO is much more communicative. He was, a better shot caller. He had better comms, and that's what they kept going back to. They were like, comparably as players, they were pretty close, but EQO definitely talked more. So, and I've heard that Soon has the same problem. Like Soon can go quiet when he's like hyper concentrating. So they need someone really talkative. And if you've ever watched Cruz's stream, he definitely falls into that line. And I don't think AKM or Unco really fix either one of those problems. So from that side, I don't think that would be a right choice. But it's not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, Rogue was a highly successful team, so you would be crazy not to at least have a thought in your head like, let's try to get as many members of Rogue together as we can. But you have to remember, at the end of the day, Rogue was a highly successful team, but they weren't the most successful team in that era. And teams from that era have traditionally not fared well in Overwatch League. So while you can think about it, you should probably value the individual players more than, their history at this point.
Absolutely. And, for me, like, having followed Cruz for a long time, all the way back to, like, pre-reunited days, this is someone that I was hyping up quite a bit in the World Cup. Just knowing his more, like, bodyguard style of Lucio play and just creating the separation that he needs when he sees an oncoming Dragon Blade. Because, that's still something that we don't get to see a lot of when it comes to, peeling for the support line. Sometimes you can just leave it up to your Lucio and you don't have to have your diva fall back to protect you, which seems so weird that we don't get to see that. Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about Toronto, and I say a little bit primarily because in regards to Toronto, it's been pretty quiet on their front in regards to the rumor mill. So as of right now, we have only heard about 3 potential players for Toronto. We've heard a lot more about Vancouver than we have Toronto. For Toronto so far, we've heard for the tank line, them getting Envy. For DPS, they have Wakid. And then support or flex, depending on where he ends up fitting in this, they have been in talks with Guido, former flex support for the Seoul Dynasty. Now, Guido in the past has played projectile DPS, so, he could fall in either line in regards to that. And, when we look at Envy, having left the LA Valiant, a lot of that was just due to the fact that, there wasn't really a spot for him on that team once Space became of age. And, we have hyped up Space to be almost like the second coming, essentially. Like, his diva play has been so astronomical, and that pun was totally intended, that, like, it's hard to really, like, feel the need or necessity to have a backup in that position. And Envy's play was usually pretty good for that role, and, Space just happened to, beat him out. So when we look at Toronto, basically when it comes to their trials, we've heard a lot of talks about, like, teams like O2 Ardiant, as well as MVP Space, both teams being Korean, sort of like middle-of-the-pack Korean teams, but MVP Space always kind of had this thing where you can never, like, really count them out. They're a really gritty team, and O2 Ardiant, at least as of late, had kind of become one of these Cinderella stories in Apex. Now, looking at this, so far, like, they only have Korean players, so I know it's still really early on, but it does seem like Toronto will be moving towards that direction. But Guido has actually been linked to not only Toronto, but another team that we will be talking about, that being Washington, D.C. But if Wakid is going to be on this team, do you feel like that would be the deciding factor for someone like Guido to stick with Toronto over a team like DC?
It could be. It really depends on how well they mesh together on the dynasty, and I'm sure they played a lot together in the practice area, like in the practice squad, because they were well, Wakid was in and out.
Right.
Guido was rarely in and out, but it really depends how close they got. And you're absolutely right with Envy as well. Like with the Valiant, you need someone on the bench, but you don't have Tom Brady and then put Aaron Rodgers on the bench. Like that's basically what this is. It's that kind of situation. Like these are two, definitely starting players in Valiant chose space, which is the right choice. But Envy deserves to be a starter on another roster. And just these three together, if it is true, is a good building block. Like it's a good place to start. You have three solid players in all of their roles. Like I wouldn't put them at their top of their roles, but I wouldn't put them at their bottom. We really haven't seen a lot of Guido, so I can't accurately judge how well he would play in a team that is functional at the time, because a lot of what we saw with Guido was during some very dysfunctional times in the dynasty. But he from what I've seen, like I've watched him on other people's streams and stuff like that, he seems like a very confident player, and he seems very good at both projectile and support. So I feel like he's at least a good building block. Like you may need a stronger support to help him, but he is a good building block. And you can't undervalue the experience from season one. Like players with season one experience are going to be highly sought after, to couple with players that haven't played in season one. So, and that goes for coaching as well. Like I feel like they also have Bishop, which is confirmed as far as I know. And he was London Spitfire's coach before he just left through their downturn, and that led to more problems with the Spitfire. So I'm kind of interested to see how Bishop does too. So I think this whole rumor mill of these three players, and then Bishop as the confirmed head coach, could be a very interesting team. I'm sad that they're both Canadian teams are really looking like they're gonna be Korean teams if this pans out, but we'll see. I mean, we'll see. I can't say too much because, like you said, it's three players rumored, and one of them is tied to another team in a rumor. So, we'll see how this shapes up.
Absolutely. So, let's talk about the team that Guido is also being rumored to be linked to, that being Washington, D.C. Now, D.C. came out early. They talked a lot about their staffing. We know, Wizardion is on this. They picked up Janice, formerly of the New York Excelsior. That's already confirmed. When we look at the rumor mill, looking at the DPS line, they are looking to sign Corey and Otto. Then for the support line, we have Fazix, Hayonu, and Guido. Now, when you kind of look at some of these names, like DC looks to be going kind of like that Boston route in regards to these alleged sign-ins. You have a lot of players that maybe aren't perceived to be like top stars, kind of like Stryker was when he was picked up for Boston. When you look at Hyunwoo, this is a player that comes from WNV Korea, which was a Korean team that really made a pretty big splash in the Chinese scene for months. And then he, went on to play for Meta Gaming, which is like Meta Bellum, Meta Athena, a very well-respected Korean team. And right now, this is a mixed roster. You have players from Korea, you have players from the United States, which really isn't too much of a surprise. Just knowing that, their coaching staff is already pretty mixed to begin with. But I'm really happy to see Corey on this list. Corey was one of the players that Avala had scouted during Contenders, just because, she felt that Corey had, Overwatch League level aim and just the ability to carry a game. And, we can talk about, whether or not that's something to really look at in a player, because it is a team game, but that's a whole nother discussion. But Corey's definitely made a pretty big wave in Contenders, as part of the Gladiators Legion, which is, the LA Gladiators Academy team. And for me, when I look at a player like Corey, this like going into this free agent signing window, this would have been someone that if I was the Gladiators, I would have promoted to the main roster. So it's cool that he's still linked to go to, another team out there. And with Fozix, this has been someone that has been grinding Overwatch since, all the way back in 2016. This is a player that, while mechanically might not be at the top level, his game sense is definitely up there. Like, I don't know if I'd put him on the same level as Siegel, but he's a similar mindset in regards to players. So I'm happy to see him getting linked to this team. So all in all, we got some pretty interesting names, and Otto, pretty good sign-in. And that covers their tracer play. Covers their hit scan, so you already got two fronts of that equation already. So all in all, I'd say this is a good start, and going into this season, I don't want to be one of those guys or members of the community that are going to look at a team on paper and just rule them out automatically. So many of us did that with Boston.
No,
and
nobody did that.
Everyone, literally everyone, and we all missed the mark by quite a substantial amount. So I'm going to hold off a little bit more until we see these teams actually play. But that being said, there's some very interesting pieces to this puzzle, and I'm really curious to see if this is just going to be a mix, United States, Korean roster, or if they're going to be leaning more so on one side than the other. But so far, so good. And I want to know, if they're just going to pick up another Korean tank to pair with Janice, or if they're maybe look at Gladiators Legion and try to pick up some more of their players. Because, that tank duo for their contenders team is pretty legit.
It could be this rumored roster is interesting to me because it seems like they are going like the Boston, almost like the Philadelphia route, where they're just cherry picking players out of different regions, primarily US and Korea, but I'm sure they're not ruling out EU, just because we have seen rosters like this work in the past. And Fozix, like you said, I actually feel like his mechanics are very good. Obviously, he's a top tier player, but you're right. He does have the same brain mentality as somebody like Siegel, and players like that do really well in the support role. And Custa is the case study for that because while I think Siegel is mechanically and probably cerebrally a little bit better than Custa is much better at vocalizing that. And if Fozix can bring that to the team, that kind of makes up a little bit for any mechanical misgivings. And when I say mechanical misgivings, it's he's still one of the best supports in the world, so you got to remember that. Corey is an absolute monster, and the reason I don't think he got called up to the Gladiators is because they have Surefour. There's too huge of an overlap there, and I'm sure maybe they wanted to call him up, but I think Corey kind of knew that he could be starter material, and he knew that if he went to the Gladiators, he could, he would play second fiddle to Surefour unless Surefour really had a major downturn, which is possible. I mean, it's possible for any meta, at any time for any of these players to have a slump. We've seen it in the past multiple times. The best players in the world are no longer the best players in the world. So, but I think it's the right move. I think he should kind of branch out on his own. And if he goes to DC, that's a good pickup. Again, Guido could fit in. He has season 1 experience. He's a flex, and this team is currently lacking projectile DPS. If you look at their 2 DPS that are rumored. So overall, DC's shaping up to be a scary team. If some of these end up being true, I wouldn't be surprised if we see some more US talent be picked up from contenders, just to kind of fill out the role. But then again, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of Koreans and then there's only a couple of US players sprinkled in. It really depends on I guess what Wizard has in mind for the team. I'm sure he's been through season 1. He knows what to expect in meta shifts and stuff like that. So teams this season are going to have a much better idea of how to future proof themselves a little bit better. So I'm curious to see where this goes. But I am getting a strong NYXL 2.0 vibe from this. Like I feel like Wizard took what he learned from season 1 and he's like now to rebuild it and make it stronger.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, with that being said, let's take a look at the Atlanta airports. It's still unofficial. And first off, like I have been like waiting for Atlanta to announce something on their Twitter today, just based off of their tweet earlier. Hasn't happened. So Atlanta dropping a ball. As the Slambo, as the Presidente, he needs to be on top of that. But anyways, Atlanta, like I feel like this is the team that is going to have the buzz around them. And a lot of that, part of that is definitely because of the potential sign-in of someone like the Fran. And, let's get the elephant out of the room right off the bat. When you look at this rumored Atlanta roster, they have 2 players that have been known for suspensions. One being the Fran, the other being Gator, formerly of Goats. And, we talk about player management in Season 1 and how some teams definitely took a risk in regards to some of the players that they were bringing onto the team because, some of them are pretty outspoken in their own ways or, might rub people the wrong way. And the Fran and Gator both kind of fit in that category. Gator has, well, Goats as a whole have been known as one of the more toxic Tier 2 teams for quite some time. And Gator has been with them pretty much every step of the way. But one way or another, like, looking at this roster, okay, so we got the tank line. We have Pokepo, Daco, and Gator. For DPS, they're looking at Defren, Erster, and Inlayer. And then the support line is Kodak and Mazah. So all in all, like, I'm really excited about this roster. You have a mixed roster, components from Europe, NA, as well as Korea. And, it's Atlanta, so, I'm just looking forward to them making it all the way to the finals, only to blow a lead, because that's what Atlanta's known for. And based off of the official Twitter, not a fake one like the Paris one, the ATL colors are looking to be red and black, so staying true to Atlanta and their other sports organizations out there. And, for one, like, there are 2 key things that I love about this rumored roster. One, Kodak. Like, I have been a huge fan of Kodak for quite some time, and he's really, he's had his moment in the Overwatch World Cup already. That casual 5k frag with Zenyatta, not something you see every day. And I'm just looking forward to seeing him give some of these other fraggers a run for their money on that role. The other side is, you have the tank line from Element Mystic. You have Pokebo, you have Daco, and this has been one of the best tank lines in Korea for quite some time. And Element Mystic was, this team that, back when Lunatic High, back when Call into Panthera were like these powerhouse teams, same with Runaway, Element Mystic was this very young, up-and-coming team that was pulling off these upsets against these well-established, well-seasoned veteran teams. So I will be very happy to see them competing on the largest stage in the Overwatch League. And, that does lead me to believe that, Gator for this team would be on the outside looking in. So it's kind of hard to see where exactly he would fit into the situation where, he might see some play over the other off-tank. But you have Erster, and, if he's on this team, definitely keep an eye out for his Genji play, because he has been one of the better Genji players in Korea. So all in all, like, there are a lot of things that I like about this lineup. You even have, like, Maza from Team Giganti, another well-seasoned veteran. And, if we're getting, like, this new and improved Soldier, like, I want to see the impact a player like Defran can have in the Overwatch League after not having been in the spotlight for, quite some time now, just due to his history.
All right, so first, isn't Gator currently banned from contenders? Like, isn't he one of the few that the ban stuck through?
I'm trying to remember because I remember it being
Because some of them
like
were reversed,
back.
and they were all 1-year bans, and I feel like Gator was one of the ones that was followed through with, because wasn't didn't XQC replace Gator? Like, wasn't that initially how it happened? Um,
Yeah, because
so if that's
I'm pretty sure Kaluge was the tank that was actually still playing, so I believe that's correct.
right, so I'm curious to see if Gator can play in the Owl to begin with. And second of all, like, you're right. Like, why would you play him when you've got Pokpo and Dako? Like, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, those two tanks together are phenomenal. Like, every time I actually tune into an Element Mystic game, I'm just like, wow, these guys are like 100% on the same page. Like, regardless of what the rest of the team is doing, the tank line is where it needs to be. And I've talked in the past about Defran, so I'm excited as most people are to see what he can do in the league if he gets it together. And the fact that Selfless Brad is the head coach of this team,
Right.
is confirmed head coach of this team. He obviously has a lot of history with Defran, and he was one of the few people that defended Defran through like all of his stuff. Like, he was one of the few people that stood by him and said, like, no, you guys don't know the whole story, stuff like that. So the fact that he's already there leads the Defran rumor more credence, I guess. Kodak, you sung Kodak's praises, and I have like a whole paragraph here written on like all the highlights of Kodak that you hit already. So the fact that he could possibly be on this roster makes me very excited for the Atlanta team. And that is hard for me, because I was like, all right, I'm a Fuel fan, but I'm also going to support DC because they're the home team for me. But I can't support the Fuel, DC, and Atlanta. So it's going to be tough if this ends up being for what it is. But I will say that Atlanta, they have confirmed a lot of their coaching staff, and they have one of the like biggest coaching rosters we've seen. Like, they have like a head coach, which is Brad. They have an assistant coach. They have an analyst. They have a player development coach, translator, and then they also have the general like president, CEO, all confirmed. So that's actually pretty impressive that a team would put that much work into it. So Slambo must be doing really good with this team, because he's like, look, this is what we talk about, so you guys got to do this. And all jokes aside, I feel like they are making the right moves behind the scenes that are confirmed to set up these unconfirmed, these unofficial rosters to possibly be true and to possibly put them on a winning trajectory.
Yeah, it's almost like they have like an inside source that they're listening to week after week to guide them along the way, so they they don't have to relearn the mistakes of some of these inaugural rosters from season one.
Kebab getters.
All right. Well, with that being said, that's a look at the rumored Atlantic Division rosters for these expansion teams. Next week, we'll be taking a look at the other 4 expansion teams from the Pacific Division. So, in regards to more unconfirmed news, this came from one of the Overwatch League Chinese Twitters, and it took a look at some of the perceived changes to the 2019 schedule for the Overwatch League. So there are definitely a couple of things to note. If this is true, Overwatch League is not going to kick off until February, like mid-February. We are still looking at a season that consists of 4 stages, each one consisting of 5 weeks. Teams are looking at playing 28 matches in the regular season, so, doing math, Sampo's not here, so we don't have to worry about it. That would be 7 per stage. And, we have Paris, Toronto, Washington, D.C., and Atlanta joining the Atlantic Division, which leaves Vancouver, Chengdu, Guangzhou, and Hangzhou joining the Pacific Division. So, taking a look at the playoff structure, we're looking at first-place teams in each division qualifying for the playoffs, which, that's currently how it is for the end-of-season playoffs. And when it comes to the next 4 slots, that will go to, whatever 4 teams have the best win-loss record, regardless of what division that they're in. So that's, pretty similar to what we already have in place. But something new that they're adding is wildcard rounds. So, two more teams will qualify for the playoffs in the wild card round following the regular season. So, looking at traditional sports, the wild card round is, pretty common. It's October, so there's MLB playoffs going on right now, so that's a key example of that. So, you have two teams that were kind of like on the bubble, and then the winner of that ends up moving on to the playoffs. So, we're expecting something similar to that. But who knows if it's going to be like a best of like a normal set, like a 4-map set, or if it's going to be like a traditional playoffs, like best of 5 maps or anything like that. We obviously still don't know. Again, this is all rumored, but I like that they are giving the Seoul Dynasty, additional opportunities to make the playoffs. So that's a Seoul
More
Dynasty
Seoul Dynasty
spot.
playoff spots.
But when you look at how many expansion teams they added, right? Like they should have added more wildcard spots in order to make room for Seoul. That's what I'm sticking with. But regardless, so we got 2 more teams qualifying for the playoffs due to the wild card. When it comes to the actual schedule, teams will be playing anywhere from 0 to 2 matches a week. We have the midseason breaks being held longer. They're also moving the All-Star weekend to, in between Stage 2 and Stage 3, how it should have been in the first place. I still cannot wrap my head around why they held it at the end of the year. But it's looking like the preseason won't be kicking off until January, right? And, there's that other show match between the Houston Outlaws and the London Spitfire, which is part of the Gilded Gala. That's also happening in January. So, it's safe to say, like, preseason will kick off after whatever, that show match is taking place. But that being said, when we talk about the Overwatch League schedule, we have to take a look back at Season 1. Teams had played 10 games per stage, 40 games overall, not including any sort of stage playoff or end-of-season playoffs. And we saw how much that impacted, the players' mental health. You had players that had to, opt out of competing in the World Cup. You had players that were feeling, stressed out and felt homesick, had to return to Korea. Or, just some players that kind of, felt like they lost their mojo kind of midway through the season. So it's a little bit of everything. So when we look at these perceived changes, knowing that teams are playing less games overall, we got longer break periods, how do you think that is going to affect the player mental health and, the burnout that could come from competing at this highest level?
It's going to help immensely. Everything that was leaked in this points me to say that they had an open talk with the players, and all the players have said, that's too many games. So the fact that teams will have possible bye weeks, maybe 1 game a week at certain weeks, that really points me to say that a lot of the players were like, we need more time. And that's all the matches are going to be better for it, because if you only have 1 match a week, then you prepare for that match wholeheartedly and you don't have to split your time. Like we got to see a lot of teams in the past would have to play like London and New York in Season 1. And okay, well, how do you prepare for that? Do you just prepare for New York? Do you just prepare for London? Realistically, you have to split your time. So the fact that teams could only be, playing 1 week, or, if they have 2 in a week, maybe they had the week off before. So there's a lot more time to, kind of prepare for that. So this is all very good. The All-Star weekend actually surprised me, because I feel like between 2 and 3 is too early. I feel like maybe between 3 and 4 would have been better. Just because there was a very big difference in stages 1 and 2 than we saw in 3 and 4. So, and that could be player age, that could be Season 1, maybe Season 2 won't be as drastic, but I do really like what we got to see from this league. The wild card is a good addition. So, they said 2 teams will qualify for the playoffs in a wild card round. So that means up to 4 4 teams will compete for those 2 slots. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. Like you said, whether it's going to be, best best of 5, best of 7, whatever, Widowmaker showdown, who knows how the, but I I'm very happy to see that they kind of took the feedback. If this is true that they took the feedback from stage 1, I'm sure players like Neptuno and all the other players that played like 30 plus matches in the season are like, all right, I can't, this is too mentally exhausting. And it's actually better for the league that they do it this way, because if teams aren't as stressed, then players are going to go home and play on stream more, which was a big problem during the season, and that's going to generate more hype. So I feel like all around, if all of these changes are true, these are all good changes. Like I said, the only one that struck me weird was the All-Star game, because like I said, I feel like that's too early, because you haven't quite got the full picture. Like I feel like 3 and 4 would have been better.
Absolutely. And something I forgot to note with this leak was when they talked about the start date for Season 2, they had talked about it starting on a Friday. Again, this is Beijing time, so that would technically be on a Thursday. So we would be looking at February 14th. Now, that being said, like, that in itself is kind of a little bit weird, because we're accustomed to, games happening Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So with that in mind, Spider, like, do you feel like we are only going to be getting 3 days? Or maybe they're going to push back later in the week and still run the 4-day schedule?
It could just be first week starts on a Friday. Like maybe the first week they run, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday as a first week, or maybe the first week they run 3 days, like a super hype first, first day, and then a second day they have like a long day, like just more matches than normal, or maybe the third day, because that would be a Saturday for us. They have like a long day, and then from that point forward they move to a 4-day structure. Like I don't see them pushing for a 3-day structure, just because the amount of matches and stuff has lessened per team, but there's still there's still going to be a lot of matches. So I feel like pushing the time even longer, because even 4 matches a night was taxing even to us, like the die-hard fan. So I feel like they don't want to push it more than that. But I could see them opting for more of, the only counter argument I have to that is I could see them pushing it towards like a few games Thursday, a few games Friday, and then like Overwatch League Saturday, where they go like the NFL route, where they have all their games on. The only reason the NFL gets away with it, though, is because they have multiple games on at the same time. Right. So I don't see them doing that, but it's a possibility. Like they have a lot of options, but I personally think it's probably going to end up being the 4-day structure again. It's just they may have a different schedule for opening night, or it could be that it's not finalized. Like who knows? Like this is just a leak, so nothing is confirmed yet. So we'll see.
Right, and it's also important to note, like, if all of this does come to fruition, and teams are playing 0 to 2 weeks, that would also mean that teams would be getting a bye week. So I feel like that in itself would also be a very interesting element to the season, because when it comes to these teams that have a very strong coach and staff, it really gives them the opportunity to take advantage of having that extra week worth of preparation for their next opponent or opponents, depending on, how many games their team would end up playing. So I'm really curious to see how that's going to work. And, it's not going to be like Contenders where bye week is essentially a free win. No, it's nothing like that. But, it having less games played overall for these teams is also going to just elevate the level of gameplay that we're going to be seeing, just because you're not going to have the same amount of burnout. You'll have these coaching staffs having more time to, review VODs or watch the tapes, or, just prepare and have, like, team-specific strats for whoever their opponent is going to be. So I feel like across the board, like, what we're going to be getting with Season 2 is, just better player health. Hopefully, management with players as a whole is going to be a lot better. Hopefully, we'll have teams that aren't going to make the mayhem mistake of having short staffing issues. Because, yeah, that was definitely rough, let alone what they did with their roster, which was in similar effect. But I feel like we'll get, like, the Overwatch League as it was meant to be, like, at at the highest caliber, which, maybe we didn't always get all the time during Season 1.
Yeah, basically 100%. Like all the games are going to be better. The players are going to be happier. The fans are going to be happier. And even though you're going to see your individual team less, the league as a whole will still be there pretty much in the same capacity. So just overall, it's 100. If this is true, these are, like I said, 100% positive changes. Like there was nothing in here that I was overtly like, oh, they shouldn't have did that. Like that's dumb. So, if it's true, good for them for listening.
Absolutely. Okay, so with that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead. We're going to close it out for this week. So if you guys want to help us out, one of the best ways to do that is to leave us a review over on iTunes. We're always looking for ways to improve the show. If you guys have like any sort of topics you want us to discuss as well, we're always looking at suggestions for that. We do have our Overwatch League, Path to Pro podcast directory on our website, as well as, a podcast revolving around the content creators, that being Overwatch Recall. So every Sunday, we have our episodic listings of all the latest content on our website. And on Monday, or Sunday, my days are mixed up. Yesterday, I actually sat down and interviewed Rob May from Omnic Labs. So that episode of Overwatch Recall is in stores now, so definitely check that one out. Had a good time there, and Rob and I and a couple other podcasters had played some competitive after that interview, which was a lot of fun. But in regards to where you can get a hold of us on the social media, you can do so a number of ways. So, Spider, why don't you let our listeners know how they can reach us on there?
Sure, let me put my shilling pants on. You can find us if you want to email the show. You can do it at contact@owlnshow.com. Our Twitter and Instagram is @owlnshow. The website is www.owlnshow.com. You can find our YouTube page. It is youtube.com/Overwatch League Network. I think we did that just so I wouldn't say OWLN Show like a million zillion times. But youtube.com/Overwatch League Network. If a patch drops tomorrow, I will have a video for it telling you everything you need to know about the patch. You can find our Discord at discord.me/OWLN show. Twitch.tv. If you're listening to the audio version only, you should absolutely watch the show because then you get to see me make all kinds of funny faces. But it's twitch.tv/OWLN show. We are a Twitch affiliate, so you can show your support by subscribing. You get a cool emote, and the little badgy thing, all that fun stuff you get with Twitch. If you want to, I would highly advise that you check out all of our programming because we have quite a few things to watch. So you're currently listening to Overwatch League Network. It is our primary show where we talk about Overwatch League, World Cup, all the major pro stuff, and then Path to Pro. And that is Mondays at 7 p.m. PDT. If you're more interested in the variety side and a little bit of the Overwatch League Pro stuff, you should listen to our Wednesday show at 5 p.m. PDT, which is Heroes Never Die, basically our variety show, which I am sure that we will absolutely be talking about Junkenstein. And we actually just got a Twitch Prime sub from our co-host of Heroes Never Die, Ed, and our Overwatch. And because he Twitch Prime subbed, I will be nice to him all week. My promise. Just this week, though. But Thursdays, Fridays, or Saturdays, we typically do host streams. It rotates depending on availability and how good my kids were that night and how much I actually feel like streaming. So I typically take the Friday blocks, but, sometimes I do Saturdays too. Totem can take Thursdays or Saturdays. You're usually out of the house on Fridays, so you typically don't do too many Friday streams, but tune in for those. Those are usually a lot of fun. Last weekend we did Mystery Heroes, and we lived up to our title of the hosts die in Mystery Heroes, which we did quite frequently. You can find myself on Twitter at SpiderGD. If I'm on Twitch, I'm usually here, OWLN Show. Slambo, who unfortunately couldn't be with us tonight, will hopefully be back very soon. We miss him, and he's had a lot of stuff going on. But you can find him at Slambo Overwatch.
Yep, and as for myself, you can find me over on Twitter at TerminallyDrunkCTR. And again, if I am live on Twitch, it will be on our podcast channel at twitch.tv/OWLN Show. But with that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and call it from here. So thank you so much for tuning in. Again, this has been Overwatch League Network. You've been listening to episode number 53. I am your host, Emily Drunk, joined by my co-host Spider, and we will see you back on Wednesday for our next episode of Heroes Never Die. Guys, have a good night.
Thank you for listening to the Overwatch League Network. Be sure to follow the show on Twitter at OWLN Show. The theme music for OWLN is the main theme and victory theme guitar remix by Michael Mack.